For the ones who get it done, the most important part is the one you need now. And the best partner is the one who can deliver. That's why millions of maintenance and repair pros trust Grainger, because we have professional-grade supplies for every industry, even hard-to-find products. And we have same-day pickup and next-day delivery on most orders. But most importantly, we have an unwavering commitment to help keep you up and running. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Hey, warmer from the low! Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Heaps Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. We've got an excellent podcast for you. We're going to be joined in a few minutes by one of our good friends, Rocco Miller, who does great work over at Bracketeer.org, taking a look at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. We're going to be chatting with him about what we saw with the NBA draft decisions last week, the winners and losers of it, which teams he feels like have had a good/bad offseason, and we'll parse through a few mid-majors as well. We always have to do that with our good friend Rocco. And then in the final segment, I really didn't do too much of a recap of the news and notes from college basketball on Sunday, so this will be a little bit of a weekend recap. Weekends now that we've reached June, we're going to be seeing many fewer, shall we say, portal updates, so we're going to be diving in on what we did see over the weekend, as we did see a few impactful guys decide where they're going to be going, and I feel like there are some good moves out there. Now there's only like 4 or 5, but we'll recap those and we'll get you guys all up to date there. And if you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of 2 ways to be able to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters the name does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. While I did not get in any Twitter/X questions, everything is powered by EdgeBoost. EdgeBoost is making sure that bettors are able to receive access to the funds that they need for all of their gambling-related transactions. And if you go to edgeboost.bet, you utilize the promo code of Greg, G-R-E-G, you get a $1 match on your first deposit up to $25. So they're really making it easy for bettors to be able to access their funds and utilize those funds whenever they want to. Now let's talk with our good friend Rocco Miller. He also does a great job with the Field of 68 with their mid-major show during the season as well. You're able to follow him on Twitter/X at his first and last name, Rocco Miller, the number 8 altogether. And Rocco, it's great to get you aboard. Thank you so much.
Greg, good to be back on with you. We are entering June. Can you believe it?
Oh, I can, because the calendar now reads June, and we just got those NBA draft decisions all done. And just how did you think that those NBA draft decisions went? Because I've said this on the podcast the last few off seasons, and I feel like it's worth saying once again, it just feels like in this day and age of college basketball, there's just been many more winners than losers with these decisions.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I think, as a whole, the amount of players returning to college just continues to increase in terms of the talent pool. We're seeing, even here at the last minute, a couple surprises to me, starting off with Yaxel Landenborg staying in college, obviously going to transfer to Michigan and give them a chance to compete for basically everything, a Big Ten title, a Final Four, and a national championship ultimately, at least on paper. And Aberon Phelan, that's a tremendously talented kid from Alabama who I thought had done enough, shown enough at the highest level in the SEC. They figured out a way to keep him on board down in Tuscaloosa. These are just things that simply were not possible, even just a couple of years ago. They headlined the list, but you also saw late in the process, Alex Condon did end up coming back to Florida. Uzan back to Houston is massive for their opportunity to get back to the national championship game or repeat as Big 12 champions. The Duke situation was a little bit different, but they end up getting Dame Sarr, a guy that would have ultimately probably landed with Kansas. Duke ponied up extra resources after losing out on Cedric Coward. And I think with Cedric Coward's case, it's a little bit different because he only played the 6 games last year. He's got a little bit of injury concern. He doesn't probably want to come back to college and get hurt again. And his stock just skyrocketed. And I think, part of it is what he's done himself. Of course, the NBA does not really let things slip through the cracks too much in terms of injury research. But his upside combined with a bunch of these other guys staying in college really kind of got him into a draft position that he might not have had any angle to achieve without kind of the combination of events. And so that leads to Duke getting Dame Sarr instead of Cedric Coward. And that leaves Kansas really kind of hurting. So we'll get into them more as we go. But I think Pettiford coming back to Auburn also just massive, right? Like I thought he had done plenty enough and has tons of upside, and he's only 6'1" to just go out and, do his best to get in the first round. He definitely was probably, from what I was told, like leaning more of a first rounder than a second rounder. So again, like just a lot of the names I named, minus the Duke situation there, Greg, it's a little bit of a different can of worms now that so many guys that probably would have been first round picks, or at least had first round grades coming into June, are opting to stay in school because there's enough money in college basketball to make that possible.
Yeah, it's been wild what we've seen over the last few seasons. And to your point, these guys that they would have been good as gone as a few years ago, they're going to be heading back. And I still remember a lot of guys where it's like, man, you went undrafted, you went in the late second round. Why didn't you go back to school? It's because there was no money involved, and now there certainly is. And I still thought that one of the most interesting moves that we saw, though, was LeBaron Filan, who I thought was as good as gone. It seemed like he was going to be completely in the NBA draft, in it to win it. He returns to Alabama, and I thought that they were a very unexpected winner because it felt like Alabama had already moved back off of him, and here he is coming back to school.
Right. Well, I think they just figured out a way to work it all out, like a combination of different factors, obviously money being a big part of that as well. But he's obviously got a big role for them, and he's going to develop another year. Alabama, I think, in the last couple portal cycles, they've been one of the best teams in the portal under Nate Oates since he's been there. Well, I think with the constant changing of resources and maybe some other schools catching up to them in NIL or potentially passing them, they've had to figure out more creative ways to keep their Final Four hopes alive. Getting to the Final Four 2 years ago was a huge milestone for Coach Oates and this program. The year before that, they were the number one overall team entering the NCAA tournament before getting upset by San Diego State. So they are doing everything in their power to keep that status alive and growing as they go forward, and figured out a way to keep Phelan in the fold. I thought that was crucial for any hope they have to be able to maintain a deep roster. It's still a pretty deep roster, and make a run towards another Final Four.
Absolutely. I thought that that was one of the most impactful decisions that we saw, as well as Rocco Miller, who does great work over at bracketeer.org. He's joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops, and I thought that this one was big as well. Milos Uzan, he decides that he is going to be heading back to Houston. Now, one of the residuals of that is Pop Isaacs now heads to Texas A&M, so shout out to Texas A&M, which I know you have spent a lot of time with Bucky McMillan. We'll dive into them in a minute, but they've got an interesting roster. But how do you take a look at things for Houston, now bringing Uzan back in the fold and having one of the deepest backcourts and having some of the more, shall we say, experience returning of any team in all of college basketball?
Yeah, well, I think one of the other interesting dominoes for Houston was that Pop Isaacs, as you said, went to Texas A&M. And I think within that, that might be okay because Pop Isaacs...
He didn't feel like a great Houston fit, honestly.
Right, yeah. It was going to take a lot of changes for him personally to fit in to the Kelvin Sampson style of, defense, ball pressure, and overall discipline. Let's just be fair there, because he has been able to kind of play in these free-flowing offenses, or even at Georgetown where things were a little more unstructured than Creighton. With Isaacs going to Texas A&M, maybe a much better fit. Bucky Ball is exciting. He can kind of, won't have to worry as much about defensive responsibilities and being pulled out of the game as he does at Houston. But I think you look at the remaining roster within Houston, certainly sold on 4 of the starting 5. Isaiah Harwell is supposed to be awesome too. I just, as a 4-star, you just don't know how quickly he's ready to jump onto the stage. But I have seen Chris Senack, who's a 5-star kid, top 7 kid in the country, and he's 6'10". So even if he, goes through a couple ruts during the year, he's going to rebound and he's going to defend. I think that's a little bit more dependable than Harwell, who's more of a wing player. Then you know what you're getting with Uzan, Sharp, and Tugler. That's a sweet mix to go forward with. Now, the depth will be interesting because they do bring in Khalifa Sacco, who was a pretty good overall role player and rebounder at Sam Houston. A lot of these Texas programs, and I should say a good shot blocker too, almost a block and a half per game in the Conference USA. I think that's perfect for Kelvin Sampson because a lot of these Texas programs, especially the guys like Chris Mudge, who's been down there forever, even though he's only in his second year at Sam Houston, Kelvin Sampson, obviously, your Ross Hodges, your Grant McCaslins, the network of coaches in Texas and the style of play in Texas, it has so much commonality that Sacco should give them really important minutes when it's time for a situational, defensive stop or trying to frustrate another team's best player. I really love that pickup for those situations. They add in, Ramon Walker Jr. is looking for a medical red shirt. It sounds like he'll get that. Kingston Flemings is another big-time freshman coming in. Sky's the limit as a guard. And Mercy Miller and Cedric Lath are decent depth pieces. But again, some of the bench outside of Sacco, I'm still waiting to kind of see what they can bring. I know a team like Houston doesn't typically want anybody playing more than 30 minutes a night. Uzan was 31 and a half minutes a night last year. So he'll probably have to maintain that level. They are a team that loves to go 8, 9, 10 deep and out physical you. And they'll have to really develop some of these young guys pretty quickly to make it as good as it was last year.
Yep, it is going to take some work because they had such a tremendous team last year. Losing Juwan Roberts, who was such a stalwart down low, is going to be hurting them. But no question about it. When you can add a guy like Uzan back, man, that is going to be big time for them. As Rocco Miller, who does great work over at Bracketeer.org, has shown to be on Soups. And we did mention Pop Isaacs in passing, and certainly him leaving, that does leave a little bit of depth issues for Houston, but that helps out the depth of Texas A&M. And you've spent a lot of time covering mid-major basketball like I have. We know that at Stanford, this was a team that was always trying to generate turnovers, and they had one draft decision of their own go their way with Mackenzie Mbakpo deciding to return back to school, which was very much expected. But how do you take a look at the Stanford roster? One where I don't necessarily know if they're going to be able to maintain that sort of buckyball style that Bucky McMillan had a season ago over at Stanford. But what I do know is that he's got a lot of talent on this roster. I just don't know how it's going to look.
We'll figure that out as we go. But I mean, some of these pieces I'm really, really high on personally. Jakari Lane shooting over 40% last year at North Alabama. Obviously one of the best players and all A-Sun player in that league. Is he going to be able to uphold his, 6-foot height in the SEC? I remember when Todd Golden had his first year at Florida and they brought in the Chattanooga transfer, Trey Bonham, and he was only he was probably 5'10" in reality. They listed him at 6 foot. Jakari Lane, you could say something similar about. In the SEC, you just get swallowed up because a lot of teams' backcourt start at like 6'3", 6'4", even 6'5". You look how big Arkansas's backcourt was last year as an example. So you like his game as a mid-major player for sure. Can it carry over? I think that comes down to how quickly they can move the ball. I think buckyball system is going to be critical for this roster to work, which makes it fascinating. I love what Federico brings as the big man. Obviously, he proved himself throughout the NCAA tournament this last year. And also, he's a physical, emotional player, which I think makes the difference in some cases when you have a team that's basically a transfer portal built team, which this is, and you got a guy who's been there with some leadership and some winning pedigree. And then you throw in Rylan Griffin, who can get deadly hot. He's coming over from Kansas. He had a hard time finding his groove at Kansas. He had a couple of nice games, but compared to what he was doing at Alabama, he was lights out. And so now he gets to come back to the SEC at 6'6". He's going to be a really important player for Texas A&M to succeed, in my opinion. He'll kill you when you leave him open. He's not the greatest creator. Pop Isaacs will be the guy that can knife into the lane and really try to create for these guys. Jakari Lane can do that too. It's just Pop Isaacs at 6'2", Jakari Lane at 6 foot. Can they see over the defenders and all these long arm defenders in the SEC to create enough shots? And that's where the transition game will be really, really key. The problem is a lot of the SEC has gotten very good or already know how to do it from their mid-major coaching days at what we call transition denial defense, Greg. And so that will be the big test, I think, for buckyball and how they're going to be able to, a lot of chess match stuff going on their style, wanting to get out and play their style. I'm sure they're going to do really well in non-conference play, but once they get into league play, there's going to be some punches and some counter punches, and then how will they adapt? Obviously, Mbakpo, who you said's coming back, huge upgrade, especially for the front court. You're going to be able to provide scoring and some rebounding. Marcus Hill played pretty well at NC State. Josh Holloway is a really important glue guy, mainly because Holloway was a key player. Nothing flashy statistically, but knows the buckyball system, and he will act as somewhat of a player coach in both practices and on the floor. Plus, he's taking that freshman to sophomore jump, which is where you see a lot of players make their biggest year of development. So I think even if Josh Holloway on your projections is maybe third, fourth off the bench, he will be really important to make these players come together just because he can be an extension of the staff just playing at Samford for one season.
Yep, no question about it. This is going to be such an interesting roster with Texas A&M. Lots of versatility, lots of size, but you mentioned it with regards to that backcourt. You got a few suspect pieces. You got a few guys that I think could be real deal guys as well. So that's going to be a lot of fun as Rocco Miller does such great work over at bracketeer.org is joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops. And I think that is worth mentioning with regards to the SEC as well. One of the big time winners, in my opinion, over the last few weeks was Florida, because I think a lot of people thought that Florida was going to be having a big drop off from their national title run from a season ago, but bringing back that entire front court, being able to bring in Boogie Flan, I don't know if they can go back to back. That might be making a bold statement, but certainly I take a look at this team, and if they're not in the top 5 in the preseason, they need to be really, really close to it, because they've done a nice job of being able to maintain their front court. And even though you do have a guy in Walter Clayton who's going to be out of the fold, bringing in Boogie Flan, I felt like was one of the best pickup hauls in the entire transfer portal.
Yeah, no question about it. And talk about a guy that gets the opportunity to make that freshman to sophomore leap that we were just going over, in the example of Josh Holloway. This is a much different level. Boogie Flan's an NBA talent. He could have stayed in the draft quite easily if he wanted to, and maybe even worked his way up the board with all the upside. We saw different variations of Flan throughout the Arkansas journey. Obviously, the pre-injury Boogie Flan was the focal point, had some monster individual efforts, really kind of shook things up for John L. Davis. Then he got hurt. Then he came back and reintegrated with Davis. And for, that game against St. John's, the big win of the year, and the Texas Tech game, which they had a 16-point lead, they were really, really clicking on a high level. Florida, of course, was part of that regional. I was there in San Francisco. So you knew they were scouting Boogie Flan that particular game against Texas Tech in person. Not that they didn't know who he was already based on playing against them, but I think that really sold the Florida staff on being able to mold this guy into a team player. I think he was a much different guy when he came back from injury this year than he was before his injury. And I think that's what sold the Gator staff on making this all happen. Xavier Lee is an unbelievable kid. He's played in the Ivy League. He's played in the NCAA tournament. He's pretty much done all you can do for the mid-major level, and he's incredibly intelligent. And I know that's what the Florida staff's in love with for him. He'll be able to make plays. He'll be able to make passes. A lot of people forget Xavier Lee and Boogie Flan were over 5 assists per game last year, but you have to also be fair. Like, nobody's going to have that same capability as Walter Clayton did to just make shot after shot after shot when they really needed it. If anybody can do it, maybe it's Xavier Lee. But again, Xavier Lee is going to be 4th year in college, much like Clayton was, but just a different type of athlete. A little bit not as thick. Clayton's obviously built like a football a defensive back, and so they're going to have to win a little bit differently from the backcourt point of view. But with Tommy Ha, Alex Condon, and Ruben Chinyelu all in the front court, backed up by Micah, hand locked in, and you mix in CJ Ingram, who's a promising freshman that I think will get some looks. And I love the transfer from Ohio University. They're going to use him strategically, A.J. Brown. I think there's definitely enough depth and experience here to make another run at it, like you said. To put the national championship expectation back on them, I don't think that's quite fair, but they're certainly a top 10 returning team, and they've given themselves a chance to do it again.
Yep, no question about it. With Florida, it's going to be fun to see what we get out there in the SEC. And we had a lot of big time NBA draft decisions over the last week or so. But is there a team or two that, whether it was an NBA draft decision, whether it was a transfer ad / a transfer departure, that you feel like is going a little bit under the radar and had either a really, really good or really, really bad we're going to call it 2 or so weeks, because it's been a little bit of a, shall we say, herky-jerky last 2 weeks in the back half of May. But is there a team or two that you take a look at that either really helped or hurt themselves over these last few weeks that a lot of people aren't thinking of?
Yeah, when you ask a question like that, I always got to bring it back to the non-Power 5 teams. But I would say UNLV is very interesting to me. I keep looking at this team with Kamani Hamilton in the fold and a guy like Miles Che who can dominate from the perimeter on certain nights. They've got a physical young guy in Emmanuel Steffen, who's at 6'11", developing sophomore, adds a lot of intrigue. AJ Green and Draw Gibbs Lawhorn are talented themselves in the backcourt. So UNLV in kind of a wide open Mountain West is interesting. On the players coming back list from the NBA, you got to mention San Diego State and getting Miles Bird back. That was absolutely critical for the Aztecs. So I think you got to put them at the forefront of the Mountain West Conference. But when you look across the league, you've got Utah State's getting Falslev back, and Colorado State still has some talent there under new head coach Ali Farouk-Manesh. And you've got, some good players still joining Eric Olin at New Mexico. And Nevada's still got some talent. So I think the Mountain West will be fascinating this year. And, it's one thing I'm looking at really closely because so much change is on the way with San Diego State, Boise, Utah State, Colorado State, Fresno, and others going to the Pac-12 in a year. What is that going to look like? In the Mountain West, they're going to keep New Mexico, Nevada, and theoretically UNLV. I'm not sold UNLV staying there forever, but we'll see how that plays out. But I think that could affect, some of the different dynamics that are kind of unspoken, whether games are officiated a little bit differently in that league. And they're all trying to stay extremely competitive to make the future of the Mountain West better and the future of that new Pac-12 better. So I got my eye on all those rosters pretty closely.
Yep, and rightfully so. It's going to be so interesting to see what we get out west in the new look Pac-12 and the new look Mountain West, what we're going to be getting out of those two conferences, how things are going to be able to mix and match on that front over the coming years. And I know you, Rocco, are a man that's out there in the Midwest, or is out there on the West Coast, and I know you're doing an absolutely amazing job taking a look at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. Let the good people at home know it's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Yeah, appreciate that, Greg. Thank you. You can follow me on X or Blue Sky or Twitter, whatever your favorite names for these platforms are. My handle is at Rocco Miller 8. Talking scheduling for the most part, helping all 31 leagues with non-conference games, putting different events together, putting different tournaments together, as well as home and home games, guarantee games, basically all types of non-conference games. But I'm focused on that every day, making calls across the country to find the right matches for opponents and hopefully make the season a little more exciting for the fans. And then also working on a lot of different pieces for the upcoming season. Our non-conference scheduling pages will be live over at bracketeer.org, the website I own and operate. That should be coming in the next 2 weeks with the SEC and Big Ten to start. You'll be able to, I know you've probably noticed teams like Nebraska and Purdue have already put their schedule out, so not be repetitive information, but we'll also have a lot of new information on there in regards to what games have actually already gotten done, just not been tweeted out or reported. And also, we'll be starting a new platform with Trilly Donovan in about a month, so more information coming on that, and I'll be contributing one article either a week or maybe two a month. We're working that out still, but excited to share more news on that a little bit later this summer.
Trilly Donovan making moves, by the way. I mean, that guy has really added a base over the last few years. I still remember when he was just randomly posting on Twitter/X like 3 or 4 off seasons ago. Man, oh man, the come up of Trilly Donovan needs like a 30 for 30. That is my take right there. But right now, Rocco Miller, he deserves his own 30 for 30 in the way that he does a tremendous job covering this great game of college basketball that we all know and love. Every single time he joins me, one such amazing insights, and did so again today. So big thanks to Rocco for joining me out Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Coming up next, it is that time of the podcast. I'll give you a recap of the news and notes in college basketball that we saw over the weekend.
If your job at a healthcare facility includes disinfecting against viruses, you know prevention is the best medicine, and maintaining healthy spaces starts with a healthy cleaning routine. Grainger's world-class supply chain helps ensure you have the quality products you need when you need them, from disinfectants and cleaning supplies to personal protective equipment, so you can help deliver a clean bill of health. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
And we're back in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peters, and now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Was great to be joined by Rocco Miller, who does such excellent work over at bracketeer.org. Taking a look at this, a wonderful game of college basketball. Every single time he joins me, he lends such great insights. He did so once again today. So a big thanks to Rocco for joining me in the last segment. Now it is that time of the podcast. I give you a recap of the news and notes in college basketball we saw over the last 24 hours. We saw one big-time international guy come off the board, and that would be, hopefully I say this correctly, Luka Galvik. He was over at Montegrin. That was out there in, I believe, the country of Bosnia, if I'm not mistaken. I might be screwing that up, but he's an international man of mystery. He's 22 years old. In the Adretkin League, he was averaging 14.9 points per game. He's someone that's able to shoot 40% from three-point range. He's a guy that's able to really give you a little bit of this and that. So, he's an interesting guy. He's going to be going on over to North Carolina. Again, I might have screwed up some of the specifics in terms of this international man of mystery, but he's a 22-year-old guy. He should be able to come in right away and give North Carolina a nice little bit of a boost. So I think that that'll be able to help them out, and this is certainly going to be helpful because North Carolina, they did lose a little bit with Van Allen Lubin leaving the fold, and he has decided that he is going to be going to NC State. And for Van Allen Lubin, he was very rock solid this last season as he was able to supply the team with right around about 8.5 points, 5.5 boards, showing a little bit of range. He took a few threes, but didn't necessarily pop a ton. But for Van Allen Lubin, he actually got much, much better as the season went along as well. He had a little bit of a slow start for North Carolina this last year and was a double-figure scorer in his previous season when he was at, I believe, Vanderbilt. So he has been a travel man. But with North Carolina, what they were able to do towards the back half of the season, last 11 games, he was averaging 13.5 points, 7.2 rebounds per game. He was able to throw in there just under a block per contest as well. So I really love what he's able to bring to the table. This is a good time add for NC State. And for NC State, it's just been a really good last few weeks in general. Obviously, with the NBA draft decisions, getting Darion Williams into the fold, that is going to be very impactful coming on over from Texas Tech. You bring in Will Wade in the offseason, and he's bringing with him a lot of the cavalry that was able to make him so successful over at McNeese. And then, additionally, they've done a nice job of being able to revamp that backcourt as well as last year. NC State really didn't have a lot of three-point shooting, and it's not like this team is going to absolutely light you up from three-point range, but having Terrence Arsenault, who was over at Houston, that's going to be able to help them out quite a bit. Trey Holloman is going to be coming on over from Michigan State as well. So I really look at this roster, and I think that they have done it very, very right. And yeah, Jerry Dang, who had an NBA draft decision, he decided to go back to school as well. So very well done here by NC State. Prophet Johnson, he has decided that he is going to be going to Sacramento State, and this is another nice ad for Sacramento State. Now, I have no idea whatsoever what Mike Bibby is going to be able to do as a coach, but Shaquille O'Neal is right now acting as the general manager for Sacramento State, and they've had some nice ads. Like Jeremiah Cherry was a starter over at UNLV last season. He was able to give the team like 9.5 points, 5.5 boards per contest. Brandon Gardner is a little bit of an upside guy, and he comes in out of Arizona State, a top like 300 or so recruit that should be able to space the floor a little bit. They brought in Shaq's son, Shakir O'Neal, who was over at Florida A&M this last season. You've got someone like a Jaden Teat, who was at Utah. That's a little bit of an upside guy, but Mikey Williams, the double-figure scorer, was able to supply 22-plus points per contest at the junior college level 2 seasons ago. Really has me intrigued on this team, so this is another very nice ad for them in terms of what you got last year out of Prophet Johnson when he was over at Fairfield, 13.5 points, 2.5 assists, 7.5 rebounds per game. Nice little statue stuffer. So I like this move. Curtis Lewis was a former top 10 junior college recruit out of JucoRecruiting.com from a few seasons ago. Never's really lived up to his billing because of injuries. Last year he only played 8 games over at ETSU, East Tennessee State, but he's a guy that at 6'5" has some upside. He has decided that he's going to go to Southern Miss, and for Southern Miss, thank goodness gracious, the Andre Curbelo era is done. That did not go well for them. That is one in which they want to put that era into a time capsule, bury it, and never ever dig it back up. Like, man, that was rough to say the least. But for Southern Miss, they're looking to build things right. They haven't done a lot here in the transfer portal, but you know what? Jai Benoit coming over from Elkhorn State, relatively solid rebounder there. This is one of the main guards that you have coming in, as they've got a lot of size. Eric Payman Jr. comes over from Mississippi State, a little bit of a 6'8" mixer and shaker. Followed Diogone, hopefully I said that correctly, over at Western Kentucky, 6'11" big man. So Curtis Lewis should be able to give them a little bit of pop from 3-point range. I do like this overall ad for them, and I do think that things are trending in the right direction on that front. And then you had the MEAC Defensive Player of the Year decide that he is going to be heading on over to Jacksonville State. Toby Nadosi, hopefully I said that correctly. He was able to be very good for Coppin State on the defensive side of things. Now, if you know Coppin State, they were one of the worst offensive teams in all of college basketball, and this man is going to leave something to be desired on the offensive side of things. Did shoot about 34% from 3-point range, so a little bit of credit where it is due. 12.5 points per contest for a Coppin State team that, despite its best effort efforts. They were so very sorry, but 2.5 steals per contest. But with this Jacksonville State unit, you know that they're going to be built by Coach Harper very much on the defensive side of things. Last year, they were rock solid three-point shooting with having Jerron Pierre coming into the fold and giving that team north of 20 points per contest. Not likely that they're going to have a Jerron Pierre 2.0 this season. They do bring in Jay Nash from Tulsa. He should be able to give them a little bit of facilitation, and I also do like the fact that they were able to bring in AC Bryant. He was over at Alabama A&M. Nice double-figure score in the SWAC, so they're bringing in quite a few guys from a lower level and hoping that their production from the lower level translates up. And then Mustafa El Montequil from Louisiana, nice double-figure score. He's able to be a mixer and shaker for the team, so interesting to see what Jacksonville State is going to be doing moving forward, and we're going to be taking note of everything that's happening here in the offseason on Coast to Coast Hoops, as we are set to try to get you prepared for the greatest college basketball season ever in 2025-26. And if you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of two ways to be able to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters CM, name does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. Other ways, find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. And then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. Big thanks once again to Rocco Miller, Bracketeer.org, for joining me in my segment. Coming at you guys every single day on this podcast, regular season and off season. So I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.
If your job at a healthcare facility includes disinfecting against viruses, you know prevention is the best medicine, and maintaining healthy spaces starts with a healthy cleaning routine. Grainger's world-class supply chain helps ensure you have the quality products you need when you need them, from disinfectants and cleaning supplies to personal protective equipment, so you can help deliver a clean bill of health. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.